beside Byron, and then they sealed the crypt up and nobody else was put in there afterwards. But when they reopened it up, it's understandable why, because it was full. It was small, and they just stacked coffins on top of each other.
Oh.
Even though the English establishment disapproved of Byron's scandal, he was still beloved by the masses. And when the ship, which was called the Florida, was carrying his body, and they arrived in London in July of 1824, the banks of the Thames was full of people that came to see him. And they actually caught a young boy trying to steal a piece of his shroud. Like, he got on the ship and tried to cut a piece of his shroud off to keep. They put his body on view in a London house for a week, and it was said that thousands of weeping women came to view him.
Oh, yeah.
Weeping. Thousands of weeping women. Sounds horrible.
Probably slept with every one of them. That's why they were...
Probably did. And you'll find out why they would be weeping, because, you know. In 1938, we're jumping ahead almost a century.
That's a long ways to jump.
It is a century. We're jumping ahead a century. And the Byron family crypt was reopened. And the vicar at the time, his name was Thomas Gerard Barber. And he received special permission from the government and the Byron family to search the vault for a missing crypt. He thought, because I guess that in 1887 and 1888, there had been restorative work done at this church, and the church's name is St. Mary Magdalene, and he feared that damage had been done to Byron's resting place. He's like, either somebody stole his body or they destroyed the body, and he was just like paranoid about it. But he was a historian and antiquarian, and he was kind of obsessed with Byron, so he had ulterior motives for this. He's like telling them, oh, I bet that when they did that remodel, they damaged his crypt and they might have stole his remains. We should go check him just to make sure he's still in there. So they gave him permission to do this, and he, after all was said and done, this vicar wrote a book about this whole endeavor called Byron and Where He Is Buried. So, like, he had ulterior motives for sure for digging him up. This whole thing was done in secret, and it included a small group of workmen, and then somebody he titled the antiquary, the surveyor, and the doctor. Like, it was said, because we know that Barber was a fan of Byron, and he just wanted to ensure that his body was actually entombed there, and he wanted to write a book and get famous from it. But at 4:00, they locked the church doors, and there were 40 guests waiting for the opening of Byron's vault. So even though this vicar was making sure everybody was sworn to secrecy, all the workmen and all the people that came to view it were all sworn to secrecy, he actually had invited 40 people to come sit in the church with me to view this. So it's like, dude.
You probably charged him.
He might, who knows? And the funny thing is, they listed... There's a list of the names of the people who signed in, and one of the person's names was Mr. Seymour Cox, MP. No joke.
No.
Seymour Cox, MP. After his name.
Oh, boy.
Is that not out of Bart Simpson or what?
I was going to say, is that from a Simpson? You just got that from...
I did not.
Bart called the...
I did not. It was so... I'm like giggling while I'm reading it. I'm like, no way. And especially once you get to see what they saw on Byron, it's like even more funny because of this person's name and what they look at. They're going to see more Cox in a minute. Of course, because this was his shtick. Vicar Barber, he was the first one to go into the room, and he kind of went in by himself. And he's looking around. It's really small. He was really surprised at how small the vault was, where all these coffins were. And he looks, and they're stacked upon each other. And the ones on the top were heavy, and they were basically crushing the ones below it. And some of them were almost flat. So it's like, whoever's in there is smushed.
Right.
Their remains
the weight just crushed it.
Yes. And after he looks in there, he looks and he sees what he believes to be Byron's coffin, right? And there's like 3 coffins. They're like the newest ones. He said there was faded purple velvet cloth draped over the coffins. You know, it was just like what you would think of as like a vault containing coffins. This is probably what this looks like. Mm-hmm. You know, at this point, he leaves the vaults and brought all his guests back to the church for refreshments. leaving 3
Weird.
workmen behind. I'm like, why? You finally get in there, and then you're like, oh no, it's tea time for tea. We must go and have tea. Like, seriously.
Weird.
Yeah, like English in their tea. It's tea time. You know, you gotta have your
stop
tea.
everything you're doing.
And he had refreshments for 40 people. It's like, you get all the way there, you get in there, and then you're like, oh no, we must have refreshments first. Okay. He said he left 3 workmen behind, right? So they go and they refresh themselves with their tea and cakes, probably. And upon returning, he goes in there and found the coffin of George Byron and his daughter, and it looked like they had been disturbed, like someone had opened them. And he was like terrified. Oh, somebody stole his body. I just know it. And he was afraid to look in. And then finally he was like, okay, I'm just going to open it. And he opens the coffin, and there's another lead coffin inside. So he opens that one, and he saw the perfectly embalmed face and torso of Lord Byron. And this is 114 years
that
he'd been
pickling
dead.
worked.
Right. He's like, he couldn't believe, he said he looked just like the paintings of him. He said that he could recognize him. It was him. I'm like, 114 years he'd been in that coffin, and he still was there. Which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
And come to find out, it was the workmen who opened the coffin while the good reverend refreshed his guests in the church. Like, they're like, we did all this damn work. We're not waiting for him. And they just opened it. They were like, we're going to open it to see it. It was stated that most of the body was intact. The parts that were skeletonized were his forearms and his hands, his lower shins, ankles, and feet. His hair and his body were intact, but gray is what they said. And I don't know if his hair was gray or his skin was gray or both. Who knows? He could have had gray hair. And this man, his name was E. Holdworth. He was a church warden. He was kind of in charge of the workmen. And he was interviewed in the 60s. And this is like where they got a lot of this information from, was his interview. And he said that he'd been in the army and he'd seen a lot of men like getting undressed, but he had never seen a man like Byron. He said he was built like a pony. And he was dead and embalmed, and his
flaccid.
Downstairs was the size of a pony.
Oh my god!
In death and embalming, 114 years later. Never seen anything like it. He said, like, it was visible. They said that he was basically naked in the coffin. Like, he was embalmed, but his clothes like disintegrated off of his body.
Wow!
Isn't that insane? It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that was like, there was a rumor that was he had an erection after he died, and this workman said it wasn't an erection, it was just a huge schlong, basically. And they said that the people that were there must have let them see the coffin. There's photographs of his coffin and his daughter's coffin, but no photographs of him, which... Why didn't they do that? I know that sounds just like morbid, but I would have taken a picture, especially because it was Byron's face. Like,
I know.
Why would you not? Like, I mean, you're trying to be respectful.
Want proof of his
endowment.
Just kidding. I don't want to see that.
I don't need pictures of that. They had to have taken a picture of it. They just haven't shown it because they don't want to be disrespectful.
Yeah, probably. He was a Tommy Lee of his day, because that's what the Tommy Lee's known for.
And that's the real reason why all those women were crying when he died.
Yeah. Well, now we know why the ladies loved him.
They loved him. Oh, yeah, they did. Another note is, in 1969, the Westminster Abbey finally put a memorial for Byron in their Poets' Corner.
Oh, cool.
Church. So even though they wouldn't let him be buried there, eventually, 150 years later, they put a memorial in there to him, so...
Well, there's something, I guess.
Yes. I mean, what he did isn't any worse than what some of the priests that work in the Catholic Church have done, so... Although this was a Catholic... They're, Protestant. It's not even... Yeah, they're Protestant, probably. Westminster Abbey.
You know, like, I can't form words.
What it is it's incest is a taboo thing, but at least they were both adults. She was older than him. Yeah,
They're
even though it's
consenting.
gross, they
As
were
long as,
consenting adults.
you know, he was in relationships, and he probably was, you know, in a way like a predator. Yeah, I'm sure he liked these young women, but at the time that wasn't unusual because older men married young women all the time. Then that was what happened. Like,
Yeah.
you know, 27-year-olds married 13-year-olds. Like, that wasn't weird to happen. Even though now we're like, oh God, that's awful. Not that I'm justifying it, but I'm just thinking that's nothing he did other than the sister part was
right. But I mean, the thing that he had his affair with Claire and getting her pregnant, and he started the affair when she was a child, basically. That sucked. Mm-hmm. So
that sucked, and the whole thing with his right. daughter sending her to the convent was how he treated Claire was terrible. Like, I think we talked about it more in the the Mary Shelley episode.
I didn't go into depth with that because we actually already talked about that. So if you're interested in more on that story, go listen to the Mary Shelley episode that Colleen did back in October.
Yeah.
And that she goes into more depth on the Shelleys and Mary Shelley.
And Claire. Yeah. Yep. And Claire and Shelley's, or Claire and Byron's relationship, and how she was kind of treated during that time. Kind of sucked. He kind of sucked in a lot of ways, but he also was romantic, and I'm a little obsessed, and I also hate him. So there we go.
Yeah. So that was the story of Lord Byron and his gigantic penis.
Interesting.
His pony-sized penis.
Ew. That's so gross. I don't want to think about animals' parts.
Okay. No, well, that's how they described it, so I'm just reiterating.
I know. I just wish they didn't say that, because that makes me want to puke. But
yeah, in general. Yeah, the fact that they looked at this corpse and the first thing they noticed was this giant dick. It's just like,
well, it's staring you in the face, Margaret. What are you supposed
I know, for sure. You're like, there it was.
It makes me think about I watched the show Pam and Tommy. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's on Hulu.
I haven't watched it, but I've seen it advertised.
It's on because Winter Soldier plays Tommy, and he does like the girl who plays Pam and the guy who plays Tommy. They got their stuff down so well. And at first I'm like, he doesn't look anything like Tommy Lee. And then watching it, like, you think he's Tommy Lee because he acts so much like him. Like, he mannerisms, the way he talks. But his penis it's through the whole thing, and it talks to him, and the little pee holes like talking like a mouth.
Oh my God.
It's a whole thing. It's hysterical. I really enjoyed it, and you really see, like, poor Pamela, and him just like the childlike. He's so naive and childlike. I don't know. Just kind of shows you a different side of that whole story and what happened. And, you know, I always obsessed with that story back when, you know, the whole video came out and their relationship and stuff. I kind of was like all watching it, and sometimes I get sucked into stuff like that.
I did.
And I don't want to say I get sucked into that stuff. I want to be like the person I don't get wrapped into celebrity stuff. And for a lot of stuff I don't, but every once in a while it pulls me in. Like right now, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard stuff. Pulled right into that.
I am too, but
how can Johnny Depp get more hotter? He's more hot now to me. He's even more hot.
He's attractive. I mean, it shows, like, she took videos of them in their house and they were arguing and he was slamming stuff around, and I'm like, it just makes me so sad that he was in such a toxic relationship. And you think people that are famous have it so good. I'm like, they have just as many emotional problems as all of us. Yeah. And it's like, here he is, he's married again. I think he's been married before. And he's had lots of girlfriends. And it's like, you don't want to call it quits on a relationship, even though you know you should. You know?
Well, and like their relationship was awful. She was awful.
She's not Amber Heard. She's Amber Turd. Thank you for that.
Yes. Well, and also, like, just thinking about, like, I watched the part where he talked about his childhood growing up and how abusive his mother was. And I was just like, oh my God. It was like that perpetual finding those toxic relationships in his life, because that's what he learned. Like, it just shows that. And it shows that, you know, it's not just, you know, men that are awful and beat women and abusive and you know, emotionally and psychologically abusive, and women can be that way too. And recognizing that that's a thing. And he's not perfect. I mean, he's an alcoholic. He's an addict. I'm sure that's not easy, but she definitely, use that to her advantage.